Добрий день, колеги. Ми сьогодні
Good morning, dear colleagues. Today in the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center, we greet Illya Ponomariov, who is a member of parliament in Державна Duma, State Duma of the Russian Federation. Last year he voted against the annexation of Crimea, but today we'll talk about a lot of issues. Good morning, dear friends. I still do not speak Ukrainian, but I do understand as a dog would. I'd like us today to talk about politics, about what's going on, and this was the request of organizers. We'll try to stick to this topic. The holidays have passed. The day of victory, there was a lot of comments, including mine, and I expected that after the 9th of May, the aggravation of the situation can happen. I think that the threat of this is still there. This can happen anytime, but I think that all the warnings heard from different sides, and we saw that there were visits to Moscow by Angela Merkel. She was there on the 10th of May, and she negotiated about Ukraine. She was in negotiations on Ukrainian topic as well. Then State Secretary Kerry was in Sochi and met Putin, which shows us sort of an extraordinary visit of this, extraordinary nature of this visit. You know, it does not happen often that the Minister for Foreign Affairs meets the head of state, especially when Russia is concerned and when the complicated relations between Russia and the US are concerned. There should be a top-level meeting, but we still see that a certain process is happening. Whether it will be beneficial for the solution of the situation, there's still a huge question mark. And I think that all the sides try to find a way out of the situation, but it is not evident how beneficial this way out will be for Ukraine, for instance. It is understood that Putin wants to get as much as possible. His logic is a standard logic for the contemporary Russian politics, like we unleash pretensions and then we trade and what I will cede to get what I want. And the modern society is still prone to yield to such pressure. I think that in any case, the situation will be far from completion, even if we manage to agree on something today. The fundamental interest of the Russian power is that the authorities in Ukraine are changed, and this aim will be pursued by the Kremlin, irrespective of whether there will be a real ceasefire in Donbass, whether sanctions will be removed or not, because the chief motivation of the Russian power is the internal logic, not external. It is very important to show to Russian citizens that a revolution cannot succeed at any rate in any circumstances, and don't try to repeat what has happened in Ukraine. Don't try to plant this experience in Russian ground, because this only leads to grievances and the breakup of the country, foreign intervention, and all this stuff. I think that, regrettably, the way the situation in Ukraine develops is only strengthening Kremlin in their expectations that the current authorities here won't last long, that the reforms are inconsistent, very unpopular, and that the West is engaged in rather imitation of help than real help, and there's no strategy at all about how to get out of the economic crisis in which Ukraine now is. And this means that there will be decisions concerning personnel and authorities. There will be protest actions and political crisis, and in murky water they will be able to catch their golden fish. I think that this strategy will dominate in Kremlin later as well. There was an attempt really recently to get the influence on the decision making by the party of war in Russia, because at the moment the position of the party of peace is dominant, which is about there's no difference in peace or war, and they all are anti-Ukrainian. My colleague in opposition movement, Boris Nemtsov, was killed. I think that the Russian special services are behind this. Those who are linked to the war party, who tried to snatch the initiative and become more influential than others. They didn't manage to do this. Kadyrov and Surkov, who is linked to them, were able to snatch the initiative. However, the balance that was restored in the top Russian circles is still very fragile and will be influenced by different factors that will happen very soon. There is no great strategy in Russia. There is tactics, and a lot depends on how the economic and political internal situations will form in Russia, also as the foreign policy situation. And in Ukraine, in this sense, is rather an object of manipulations than a subject, than an actor. This is a means to influence the Russian people, to influence different countries of the world from the side of the Putin regime, and what will happen in the end and how much blood will be spilled and how many people, including peaceful residents, will die. This is not taken into account at all. We, as Russian opposition, try to reverse this situation. As you know, there's a new opposition coalition being formed in Russia who have the plans to take part in local elections. This is a process which is far from free from problems. And I think that the internal configuration will be formed before the elections of 2016, but the major battle will happen in 2017, when there will be a decision whether Putin will go for another term in office, what will be the position of economic and political elites in Russia, and who may be designated as a successor. All the participants in the political process in Russia are now getting ready for this period to warm up in 2016, in December of 2016 at parliamentary elections, and in 2017 to issue major claims against the current authorities, to probably become authorities themselves. Now I'd like to finish my monologue, and I will be glad to answer your sharpest questions.
I have saying that that Russian Democrats stop where Ukrainian issue comes up. Democracy in Russia stops when Ukrainian issues comes up, and you What you did, that was a drop of hope. We saw that there are people among Democrats in Russia, and for whom the truth is more important, and who are ready to go against massive moves and ratings. And so what was your motivation to do that? Did you anticipate some consequences like persecutions in Russia? And is there room in Russia for a different opinion, for an opportunity to speak openly and to show your position openly? Because from here it seems like not. I will tell you directly. I wouldn't like to exaggerate heroism of what I did, because I did my work. What others didn't do it doesn't change my attitude to that. I was an elected deputy. I must represent the interest of my voters. I understand the opinion of my voters, and before that, I had 8 meetings in Novosibirsk region, and from where I was elected to State Duma, and at every meeting we voted people how to vote on that issue. I was trying to be very neutral, and I showed arguments for and against. The most important argument against was that we would have a fight with the nearest ally, with nation, the closest to us, brothers and neighbors, and with high probability that would mean war, the war. And there were arguments for. We hear them on Russian TV from morning to late at night. I don't want to repeat. I don't feel pleased about that, but I mentioned them too. So the opinion of people who came to meetings was divided 50-50, not 85 to 15. And people without if people are without propaganda, they think differently. And people who were voting for me for a party list, Just Russia in 2011, among those people, anti-war mood was even stronger. That's why I voted, representing their interests. About consequences, that was clear. I didn't know exactly, but that was clear. That was obvious that there would be consequences. So, anyways, I would do the same. As to the phrase that Russian Democrats expire where Ukrainian issue comes up, it's simplification. This is a rephrasing. The phrase which was told by Lenin about rotten teeth of capitalism and about Marxism. I would like to remind now that there is a discussion in Ukraine as to prohibition of symbols and destroying of monuments. Lenin relied on nationalists of all small nations in the Russian Empire, and including Ukrainian and Polish nationalists, Armenian nationalists, and Finnish and Uzbek nationalists as allies to fight against the Tsar system. And they overcame Tsar system, and the national division of Soviet Union came out after that as a result of that joint victory. So I wouldn't paint the history into black and white. It's not correct and not fair. Empire moods are present in Russia, no doubt, but I wouldn't say that they have more than 50%. Maybe 15-20% of our population are under that influence. And as to elite, probably more of such people, because they are more. Elite is more imperialistic than the population. The main part of people in Russia, they take this conflict, this war in the east of Ukraine, not as an effort to capture Ukraine. not as an effort to capture a part of Ukraine, and also not as a fight for rights of Russian people in the east of Ukraine. The majority of people take it as the war for liberation of Ukraine from slavery, which Americans, Europeans bring to your country, who elected junta, that regime in Kiev. Russians believe that we are nice, we're good, we are a nation liberators, our young people. They speak about World War II, and they believe that you are under the influence of Western propaganda, and that's why they should destroy all of that, and they should explain to you how how the things are. You are smiling here, but this is the way people think. In Novosibirsk region, 2/3 of people, they are from Ukraine. My family, half of my family, comes from Ukraine, from Zaporizhia region, and they moved when there was a big movement of Stolypin at the beginning of the 20th century. So that's why all of us have relatives in Ukraine, and all these 2/3, and the majority of those people who have Ukrainian roots, nevertheless, they support this war, but not because we want to capture, to bomb, to destroy Ukraine. And that motivation, you need to understand that motivation correctly. I would like to confirm what you told. I have relatives in Russia, and they really think that they save us. Several questions to you. The first one, I know that you lived abroad recently. Are you going to return back to Russia, and when? How, in your opinion, how the conflict in Donbass will develop? Could you anticipate? Do you have some prognosis when it will stop? And also about international sanctions. Should sanctions be tougher to stop aggression of Russia in Ukraine? Thank you. Thank you very much. To your first question, I will answer with the words of a big Dagestan poet, Rasul Gamzarov, who told that Dagestan never voluntarily joined Russian Federation and will never voluntarily leave it. I never voluntarily left Russia, and I have no chance to return back because I know that the border is closed, and they just were waiting. They decided to close the border for me, and the court did it because that decision would expire by the end of May, at the beginning of June, because it was based on the debt they thought they decided it would be paid off, and there was no reason to keep me out of the country. But for me not to be able to return, they started a new case. Officially, I don't have information. They started an unofficial criminal case against me, and the only task is not to allow me to come back to Russia. And the next step, I think, will be they will ask Interpol to find me, and Interpol will not respond to that request, but the status of wanted, it will require me to get a status of a refugee, and I'm against such techniques, and a number of countries offered me asylum, and I told no, I'm a Russian deputy, and I'm going to stay like that, and I will not give such pleasure to our Russian propaganda. I don't want to get the shelter in a different an asylum in a different country, but I cannot return back to Russia. As to the development of the situation and sanctions, the situation with sanctions is such that the way the sanctions work, they are more for internal use by those states who introduced those sanctions. Real influence on Russian economy, those are sectoral sanctions, and those sanctions which are individual, and there is no significant effect. Economic sanctions are so accurate for economic interests of any big American or European corporations to suffer that are working in Russia. That's why those sanctions have no teeth, and the only economic sanctions are those that would we put on ourselves because we prohibited the import of foods, and because of them, the prices went up in Russian shops. If that didn't happen, nobody would feel those sanctions at all. Unfortunately, citizens of Russia, they believe that it's not us, it's damn Americans. It's because of them. They refuse to supply us with food. It's very difficult to explain to people because they hear about sanctions, and that is also a negative consequence from sanctions, because from the fact of fighting against the Russian regime and elite, which is responsible for this war. For many Russians, it's a fight against them, with common people, and that enlarges that gap that separates Western countries and Russia, which is negative, because I believe that we should reduce that gap, we should cover that gap. My position about sanctions, of course, if they introduce them, they introduce them. Canceling them, it's worse than introduction of them. I wouldn't introduce them in such a form. But if we cancel, it's a signal that we prohibit, we forgive you everything, and it's not serious. If I was in the shoes of Western countries, I would change personal sanctions, not like my colleagues told, like to make the list bigger. To take raisins from abroad, it's a wrong task, and it opens the way for many speculations and discussions why we include this guy and why we kicked out this guy. I would create sort of like a prototype of future illustration. I would say all people who cooperate with state authorities in Russia, they are under the prohibition, and their assets in the West should be frozen, should be arrested, because anyone down to municipality and a village, they are responsible for existence of this regime because they participate in elections, etc. That's why all of them, they are responsible, and the way out is very simple from that. Just leave the job, and automatically you get out from that list. This would be a smart and clever approach. It could work. It would split elites, and there would be contradictions would grow, because there is a competition in Russia, and they won't include me into the sanction list, because it means that you'll get some economic benefits, and you become more popular. As to the future of Donbass, I told about that introduction, and in the better case, it will be a frozen conflict, and Russia will not try to stop it, because in the end, Putin will be just afraid that those 20, 30,000 armed people who are fighting there with Russian passports, that they'll return back with anti-Putin mood, and I would like to underline, because the majority of people who are fighting there, those mercenaries, I don't mean military men, but mercenaries, they are anti-Putin, and many of them, they were on Bolotna Square, etc. And when they come, it's not the army of fans of Putin, and they will return only if the conflict is over, and it means that that will be taken them as a betrayal. And Putin doesn't want that, and Putin wants them all of them to be killed, to kill each other. So as long as violence and battles and fights and all that, for his interests, it's better. The next question.
My question was about the future of the Russian opposition, and in Ukraine we're talking for almost a year. What shall we do with the representatives of the Russian opposition? For instance, there is a draft law that simplifies the bestowing of Ukrainian citizenship on those who are being persecuted in Russia. This is a rather complicated procedure, but the president can do this with his decree, and he has done this several times already. How probable this is that in case of threats and danger to them, the Russian opposition can move to Kiev, and what is the chance that Kiev may become sort of a London in the years of World War II? We remember that many French dissidents moved there, and General de Gaulle, who was almost unknown before that, formed the government that took power later after the victory. And second question, how probable this is that the next president, if this is not Putin, will, under some circumstances, agree to Crimea being returned to Ukraine? Thank you for two beautiful questions. First, I, of course, support entirely any actions aimed at helping the Russian opposition and protecting those who are being persecuted. I'm very thankful to the to the Ukrainian leadership for those cases where they did provide such protection, although these cases are not numerous, but they are there. I know firsthand about the problems that Russians who come to Ukraine face a lot of difficulties, and here there are two wonderful people who are filming everything that's happening in Ukraine. For the last year and a half, they were in Odessa on the 2nd of May. They have just come from Mariupol. One of them is my constant permanent aide in the Russian parliament. I try to have the entire material for the future court process about what's really been happening in Ukraine, but the issue about the status is very complicated, and it is being solved badly. And your officials are very often on very formal positions and are not ready to help. If the situation changes, this is going to be beautiful. As far as the government in exile and such things, you know, as an idea that this should happen, this is a very correct idea. And I do think that elite can be changed in a leap fashion. And in this sense, in Russia, over our 1,000-year-long history, we have several cases of such a change of elites in a leap fashion. This was done by Peter the Great and other rulers, and the level of corruption in Russia is now so high that this can happen only with the help of our ground. Which country could be the best basis for this? Well, in theory, Ukraine is the most obvious choice, but in reality, this does not happen, and the biggest number of Russian opposition leaders and activists who had to leave the country are now, I think, in Lithuania, England, America, but not in Ukraine. And there's a lot of reasons for this, and the chief reason here is, of course, an opportunity to do something. Because, you know, we are all people in the final count. People have to eat, live somewhere, and somehow to exist. What's happening to the Ukrainian economy does not provide an opportunity for people to earn their living. And to take money from the government of another country, you know, first of all, you do not offer this money, and secondly, I would not consider this right. I do not accept money from some governments that from time to time offer me money. This will contradict, for instance, my status of a Russian politician. Business could take part in what's in such a process, but it still doesn't participate even in your reforms to the full extent, not to mention the transformations in the neighboring countries. So this is the biggest factor of detention. And you know about the question where Russian Democrats end. There's a lot of myths about this. I can tell you that I did make a statement after the annexation of Crimea about the fact that I support the right of nations to self-determination, but they should be expressed in a legal way, in a lawful way, so that this right and this desire could be established in a right way. But the referendum, which was held under the barrels of machine guns, which even our president admits, and when I just simply mentioned the right of the nation to self-determination, a flock of patriots comes and says, you are the same as all the rest. Or, for instance, Khodorkovsky says, when asked whether he will return Crimea after he becomes the president, and I think that he says absolutely honestly, I won't be able to return Crimea the next day I am at power, because this will be going to be my last day as the president of Russia. In this case, I would have to shoot at my own people and to bury all the hope for democratic development in Russia. I will have to devise something lawful in this case, and the mass media just snatch out the first phrase that he won't return the Crimea, and they don't even mention his further explanations about the fact that he does consider annexation illegal and all this. I think that the new Russian authorities should, first of all, begin to prepare the legal referendum according to the Ukrainian legislation in the territory of Crimea, a normal campaign over the rather prolonged period of time, not within 2 weeks. The Scottish referendum, for instance, was being prepared for 2 years. This is the sort of time that we are talking about. And there could be a joint administration for the time of preparation of the referendum within the framework of an agreement between Ukraine and Russia. And of course, Crimea should be returned and included into the Ukrainian media space so that all the arguments could be presented and accepted or considered by the residents of the peninsula. But the major factor here is that Ukraine should become economically successful, because the buying capacity of ruble is still higher than of hryvnia, because people in Donbass live with myths that people in Russia get a lot more than people in Ukraine, those who work for the state. And you know, this is the biggest number of those who vote, of those who come to elections. This is, of course, very bad. This is paternalism, but this is still a very serious factor. If you cannot show that you are economically successful, you won't be able to convince Crimeans to vote for Ukraine. Ilya, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we cannot go on further because we have a further briefing. Thank you for your open position. Thank you very much. I am here. We can